Would you recognize your own child, if their reflection wasn't them anymore? That was the thought that kept replaying in my head the night it all began. It started with something so small, so ordinary, that I almost brushed it off. My son, Daniel, was brushing his teeth in the upstairs bathroom before bed. I leaned against the doorway, half distracted, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed it. His reflection in the mirror wasn't moving the way he was. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? You expect a reflection to be exact, every blink, every twitch, every tiny motion mirrored perfectly. But when Daniel spit into the sink and reached for his towel, his reflection just stared. His little glassy brown eyes, fixed forward, unblinking. I froze. "Danny," I said carefully, my voice tight. "Wipe your mouth, honey." He did. But the reflection didn't. The smile on his face in the mirror was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was wrong. Too knowing. Too sharp. Like it wasn't meant for me at all, but for itself. I told myself I was overtired. I told myself mirrors could play tricks. But when I blinked, hard, forcing myself to look again, his reflection snapped back into place, suddenly wiping its mouth, almost too quickly, as if it had realized I was watching. My stomach dropped. "Bedtime," I whispered, trying to keep my voice light, but my hands were trembling as I turned off the bathroom light and guided Daniel to his room. He climbed into bed, innocent, yawning. I kissed his forehead and tucked him in like always. But when I glanced at his toy shelf in the dim glow of his nightlight, the glass eyes of his teddy bear seemed to glitter strangely, catching the light in a way I had never noticed before. Watching me. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, over breakfast, Daniel was cheerful, laughing as he spooned cereal into his mouth. He looked like my son. He sounded like my son. But I couldn't stop remembering that strange delay in the mirror. So, while he was at school, I did something I'm not proud of. I dug through his baby photo albums, desperate for comfort, desperate to remind myself that he was real. At first, the photos were as I remembered, me holding him as a newborn, his tiny fingers curled around mine. His gap-toothed smile at age 3. The messy chocolate cake on his 5th birthday. But the deeper I flipped through the pages, the colder my blood ran. In some photos, Daniel's eyes looked different. Too shiny. Too dark. They didn't catch the light like normal eyes. They looked like glass. And worse, in a few of the older photographs, his reflection in a window or mirror didn't match his pose. In one picture, Daniel sat cross-legged on the living room floor, holding a toy truck. But the reflection in the glass of the TV screen showed him standing. Standing perfectly still. My hand shook so violently I dropped the album. It spilled open on the floor, and staring up at me was the most recent picture I'd taken of him, just 2 weeks ago at the park. Except in this one, he wasn't smiling anymore. His reflection in the pond behind him wasn't just still, it was watching me. Cold, unblinking, with those glass-like eyes. I snapped the album shut so fast I nearly ripped the pages. My pulse thundered in my ears. I told myself I was losing my mind, that grief was playing tricks on me, because, yes, my husband had left last year, and yes, I'd been exhausted from raising Daniel alone. But deep down, something else gnawed at me. Something was wrong with my child. And then, that evening, it got worse. After dinner, I washed dishes while Daniel played in the living room. The clinking of plates and hum of the sink drowned out most of his giggles, until they stopped. "Danny?" I called, drying my hands. No answer. I walked into the living room. He was sitting on the carpet, staring at the darkened television screen. The TV was off. But in the reflection on the glass, his eyes blinked. And his real face didn't. When I gasped, Daniel turned slowly toward me. His expression was blank, almost curious. "Mommy," he said softly, tilting his head. Why are you looking at me like that? I couldn't answer. I couldn't breathe. Because behind his reflection in the TV screen, there were others. Dozens of other children. All with the same glassy, unblinking eyes. And they were smiling. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those other children reflected in the dark TV screen, crowding together in silence, their glassy stares fixed on me like insects caught in amber. My mind kept replaying the impossible moment when Daniel's reflection blinked while his real face did not. I told myself I'd imagined it. I told myself I was tired, grieving, overworked. But a mother knows when something is wrong with her child, and this wasn't exhaustion. This was terror. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to let Daniel go to school. I kept him home under the excuse of a stomach ache. He didn't protest, he just sat at the kitchen table quietly, spooning cereal into his mouth with a calmness that didn't fit a boy his age. No complaints, no whining, no eagerness to watch cartoons. Just silence. His eyes didn't quite meet mine as he chewed. I wanted to scream at him, "Who are you?" But instead, I forced myself to move through the motions of the day. I cleaned the counters, folded laundry, checked my emails. All the while, I kept glancing at him from the corner of my eye, waiting for some sign of difference. But it was the ordinary that terrified me the most. He wasn't doing anything strange. He was too normal. Too perfect. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone, my heart pounding, and called Emma, an old friend from the neighborhood whose daughter, Lily, was in Daniel's class. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "We missed school today. Just wondering, how's Lily been lately? Everything okay?" There was a pause. Then a faint, almost strained laugh. "She's fine." "Why?" I hesitated. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding insane. "I don't know. Daniel's been off. Strange. Have you noticed anything like that with Lily?" There was a longer pause this time. When Emma finally spoke, her voice was tight, like someone pulling a zipper closed. "Kids go through phases. You know how it is. Nothing to worry about." But she hung up too quickly. I stood there, phone in hand, staring at Daniel across the room. He hadn't moved. He was just sitting cross-legged on the carpet, staring down at his action figure. But the toy was upside down, its tiny plastic face pressed into the floor, while Daniel murmured something under his breath, soft, steady, almost like a lullaby. My skin prickled. I had to know more. That afternoon, I drove Daniel to the grocery store. Anything to get out of the house, into public, surrounded by people. But as we walked down the fluorescent-lit aisles, I noticed something chilling. Other parents were watching me. Or rather, they were watching Daniel. I caught one mother in the produce section staring as her little boy tugged on her sleeve. He whispered something to her, and I swear, for a flicker of a second, his reflection in the glass refrigerator door looked older. His mouth didn't move in sync with his voice. The woman's face drained of color. She quickly dragged him away without even picking up the apples she'd been holding. And then, near the checkout, I saw Emma. She was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line as she placed a loaf of bread and milk on the conveyor belt. Lily stood beside her, clutching Emma's hand. I smiled weakly, but Emma didn't smile back. Instead, she glanced down at her daughter, and I saw it. Lily's reflection in the shiny counter blinked half a second too late. Emma's hand trembled as she swiped her credit card. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I knew. She knew it too. We weren't crazy. It was happening to more than just me. That night, after putting Daniel to bed, I stood in the hallway outside his door, clutching my phone. My palms were sweaty, my heart hammering. I scrolled through my contacts, hovered over Emma's name. Do I dare? Do I risk sounding insane? Finally, I typed a single message. You've seen it too, haven't you? The 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then vanished. Then appeared again. My throat went dry. Finally, her reply came. Don't text me about this. Don't talk about it. They'll know. I stared at the message, my blood running cold. They'll know. Who are they? Before I could reply, I heard it. A soft tapping sound, coming from Daniel's room. Not footsteps. Not shifting in bed. It was rhythmic. Deliberate. Tap. 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 Like tiny fingernails against glass. I opened the door slowly, my breath caught in my throat. Daniel was asleep, his little chest rising and falling in the faint glow of his nightlight. But his mirror on the wall. His reflection wasn't asleep. It was wide awake. And it was smiling. I didn't sleep that night. Not a second. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at Daniel's closed bedroom door across the hall, afraid of what I might see, or hear, if I let my guard down. Every now and then, I thought I heard faint scratching, as though the reflection in his mirror was clawing to get out. But when I crept closer, pressing my ear to the wood, all I could hear was his steady breathing. That should have comforted me. It didn't. By dawn, my nerves were frayed to threads. I needed answers, and Emma was the only person who might give them to me. After Daniel left for school, though it nearly broke me to let him out of my sight, I drove straight to her house. Her curtains were drawn, her lawn unkempt in a way I didn't remember. I knocked on the door, 3 sharp raps that echoed too loudly in the quiet morning. For a long time, nothing. Just when I was about to leave, the door cracked open. Emma's face peeked through the gap, pale, her eyes darting nervously up and down the street. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I need to talk to you," I begged. "Please, Emma." "I saw it. I know what you saw with Lily. I'm not crazy." Her hand tightened on the door, knuckles white. For a moment, I thought she'd shut me out. But then she pulled the door open just wide enough to let me inside, locking it quickly behind us. Her living room was dark, the blinds shut tight, the air heavy with stale coffee and dust. Lily wasn't there. I noticed the silence immediately. "Where's—" "She's at school," Emma interrupted, her voice sharp, as though even the mention of her daughter's name was dangerous. She motioned for me to sit, though she herself remained standing, pacing nervously, twisting the hem of her sweater between her fingers. "Tell me what you've seen," she demanded. And so I did. The mirror. The photographs. The TV screen. The other children. As the words spilled out, my voice cracked, but Emma didn't look surprised. Her lips pressed tighter and tighter together, her eyes shining with something like grief or fear. Finally, when I finished, she sank into the armchair opposite me and buried her face in her hands. "It's not just us," she whispered. "It's everyone. Every family in this town." Her words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean?" She looked up, and there was something haunted in her expression. "It started years ago. Before we even moved here. The kids, they change. Not all at once. Slowly. First it's small things, delays in reflections, photographs that look wrong, shadows that don't match. And then, little by little, it's like the real child fades." My throat closed. "Fades? Into what?" Emma shook her head. "I don't know. But whatever replaces them, it remembers everything. It wears their face. Their voice. It knows how to act. But if you watch closely, you can tell. They're not ours anymore." Her voice cracked on the last word. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time, I realized how hollow her cheeks looked, how exhausted she seemed, as though she had been carrying this secret for far too long. "Why hasn't anyone said anything?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger now. "Why hasn't anyone called the police, or left town, or—" "You think we haven't tried?" Emma snapped. Her voice was sharp, desperate. "People who talk about it disappear. Families who try to leave, gone. Their houses are sold, their belongings stripped, as though they were never here. It's not just the children. It's the whole town. Something else is keeping us here. Watching us." My stomach dropped. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air harder to breathe. I thought of Daniel's smile in the bathroom mirror, of the dozens of children behind his reflection, staring, waiting. "Emma," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What happens when the change is complete?" Her silence was answer enough. Before I could press further, there was a sound upstairs. A creak, slow and heavy, like a footstep. Emma froze. Her eyes went wide. "Lily?" I asked, my voice small. "No," Emma whispered, her face drained of blood. "She's supposed to be at school." We both looked at the ceiling, holding our breath. Another creak. And then, a faint tapping sound. The same sound I'd heard outside Daniel's room the night before. Tap. 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 Emma's hand clamped onto mine, her nails digging into my skin. "You need to go," she whispered fiercely. "Now. Don't come back here." I wanted to protest, but the terror in her eyes left no room for argument. She shoved me toward the door, her movements frantic, almost violent. "Emma." "Go," she hissed, slamming the door behind me so hard the glass in the window rattled. I stumbled back to my car, my heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear anything else. But just as I fumbled for my keys, I made the mistake of glancing up at the second-floor window. And there, pressed against the glass, was Lily's face. Her mouth stretched into a grin too wide for her small frame, her teeth bared like a predator's. And her eyes. Her eyes gleamed like glass marbles, catching the pale daylight, unblinking, staring straight at me. Driving home from Emma's house, my hands shook so badly on the steering wheel I could barely keep the car steady. Every street in town looked the same, quiet, ordinary, painfully normal, but now, with Emma's words ringing in my ears, that normalcy felt like a mask stretched too thin. Behind the curtains of every house, behind the carefully maintained lawns and polite waves of neighbors, there was something else. Something hiding. Watching. Waiting. I couldn't get Lily's face out of my mind. The way her reflection pressed against the upstairs glass, grinning like she knew me. Like she recognized me as part of something I hadn't agreed to join. I thought of Emma's warning, her desperate eyes, her trembling hands as she shoved me out of her house. She knew more than she'd said. She was terrified of saying too much. And if she was right, that families who spoke up vanished, then I had already put myself, and Daniel, in danger. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my stomach was knotted so tightly I thought I might vomit. Daniel's backpack lay on the porch where the school bus must have dropped him off. He was inside already, humming softly to himself. A simple, childlike sound. But after what I'd seen, even that hum unsettled me. It sounded too steady. Too deliberate. I set my purse down on the counter, trying to steady my breath, and made a decision. If I wanted answers, I wasn't going to find them from frightened neighbors or in whispers exchanged over text messages. I needed to dig into the town itself, its history, its foundation. Something like this didn't just happen. It had roots. That night, after putting Daniel to bed, I stayed awake with my laptop glowing in the darkness. I searched old town records, local folklore, anything that could explain the strange phenomenon that Emma claimed stretched back generations. At first, all I found were the expected stories, Newspaper clippings about town fairs, obituaries, articles about the founding families who'd settled here 2 centuries ago. But then I found something buried deeper, archived in a historical society blog no one had updated in years. A brief mention of an old epidemic that had swept through the town in the mid-1800s. The article was vague, calling it a sleeping sickness. Entire families, it said, had fallen into comas without warning, their eyes glazed and unresponsive. For weeks, they lay motionless, their chests rising and falling shallowly, until one by one, they either died, or woke up. The article didn't explain much. But it did note something chilling: those who woke were strangely altered. Neighbors reported a change in demeanor, claiming that their mannerisms felt rehearsed, that their eyes were glassy, like painted dolls. Some said they no longer seemed entirely human. The article ended abruptly, with a mention that records from that time had been lost in a fire at the town hall. A convenient fire. Too convenient. My skin crawled as I stared at the screen. Was this what was happening again? Had it ever really stopped? The next day, I went to the library. It was nearly empty, just the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the scent of old paper. I asked the librarian, an older man with thinning white hair, if they had archives on local history prior to the fire. His eyes flicked up sharply, studying me with sudden intensity. "Why?" he asked, his voice flat. I tried to play casual, shrugging. "I'm researching for a project. My family's been here for a while. I just wanted to know more." His gaze lingered on me a moment too long before he shook his head. "Those records are gone. Always have been. Nothing you'll find here." But I didn't believe him. His voice was too careful. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the stack of returned books on the counter. Later, when he stepped away to help another patron, I slipped past the front desk and down a narrow hall that led to the archives. Rows of filing cabinets stretched into the shadows, labels peeling with age. I scanned quickly, my pulse racing, until I found a drawer marked with the town's name. Inside were yellowed clippings, brittle documents, scattered photographs. I flipped through them, my hands shaking, until I froze on one photograph in particular. It was dated 1891. A black and white image of a group of schoolchildren standing in front of a brick building. Their faces were pale, their expressions stiff in the way old photographs often looked. But their eyes. Even in faded grayscale, their eyes gleamed unnaturally bright, catching the light in a way that didn't make sense for the photograph's exposure. Round. Reflective. Almost like glass. And in the reflection of a classroom window behind them, faint but visible, I could see more children. Dozens of them. Children who weren't standing in front of the school at all. I dropped the photo back into the drawer, my breath catching in my throat. The air in the archive felt heavy, suffocating, as though I wasn't alone. As though something unseen was leaning closer, peering over my shoulder. Then, I heard it. A soft giggle. Childlike. Echoing faintly between the filing cabinets. I spun around, heart hammering. No one was there. Just shadows, dust, and silence. I backed away, clutching my bag to my chest, and nearly collided with the librarian. He stood in the doorway, blocking my exit, his face unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. I was just. "Leave it alone." His voice was sharper now, his eyes hard. "If you care about your boy, leave it alone." The way he said it, low and deliberate, made the blood in my veins run cold. He knew. He knew exactly what was happening. I shoved past him, my breath ragged, and practically ran out of the library. The cool air outside hit my face like a slap, but it didn't help. The image of those glass-eyed children burned behind my eyelids. And worse, the librarian's warning echoed louder than my own heartbeat. If I cared about Daniel, I was supposed to stop digging. But how could I, when every time I looked into his eyes now, I wasn't sure if I was looking at my son anymore. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the librarian's words. If you care about your boy, leave it alone. The warning rattled around in my head like a stone in an empty jar, clinking with every thought. What terrified me wasn't just what he had said, but the way he had said it, like it wasn't advice but a sentence. Like he knew exactly how this would end if I didn't stop. But how could I stop when every look at Daniel made me question whether he was still my child at all? The harder I tried to convince myself everything was fine, the clearer it became that nothing was fine, not anymore. The following morning, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, eating cereal with slow, methodical movements. His spoon clinked against the bowl in perfect rhythm, a steady tick like the swing of a metronome. I realized, with a pang of horror, that he hadn't spilled a drop. Not a single splash of milk, not a single crumb on the table. Daniel had always been messy, absent-minded, prone to dribbling milk down his chin and leaving half his food untouched. But this version of him ate like he had been trained. Like someone had drilled precision into him. "Did you sleep well?" I asked, trying to sound casual. His eyes lifted from the bowl, and for a moment, the way he stared at me made my throat tighten. His pupils looked too large, too deep, reflecting the morning light in a way that gave them a wet, glassy sheen. And when he answered, his voice was flat, almost rehearsed. "Yes, Mom. I slept fine." He said the words as though he'd read them from a script. I forced a smile, but my hands trembled as I poured myself coffee. I couldn't let him see my fear. If this wasn't Daniel, if something else was wearing his face, I had to play along until I knew more. But how much longer could I pretend? Later that afternoon, I decided to test him. Something simple, something subtle. I pulled out the photo album from the living room shelf, the one Daniel loved flipping through as a toddler. He used to laugh at the baby pictures of himself covered in cake on his first birthday. I set the album on the table and opened it to that page. "Do you remember this?" I asked. He climbed into the chair across from me, his small fingers brushing the photo. His face remained expressionless. "That's me," he said simply. "Yes," I pressed gently, "but do you remember it? You cried when the frosting got in your hair. Then you laughed so hard you spit it out all over the table. Don't you remember?" He blinked slowly. "I remember." But he didn't smile. Not even a flicker of recognition crossed his face. His voice was toneless, hollow. And something inside me cracked. Because Daniel would have laughed. Daniel always laughed at that story. This child, this thing, merely repeated the memory like it had been uploaded into him. That night, after tucking him into bed, I lingered at his door longer than usual. The shadows of his room stretched unnaturally across the walls, and though his body lay still beneath the blanket, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't sleeping. That he was listening. Waiting. When I finally went to bed, I dreamt of mirrors. An endless hall of mirrors, stretching into infinity. Each one showed Daniel, but not the Daniel I knew. They all blinked out of rhythm, their heads cocking at odd, jerky angles, their glassy eyes tracking me no matter where I turned. Some pressed their hands against the glass, palms flat and smudged, as if begging to be let out. Others just grinned, sharp and too wide, as though they were waiting for me to crack the glass myself. I woke drenched in sweat, my chest heaving, but the nightmare didn't fully dissolve. From the hallway outside my room, faintly, I heard it. The sound of a child giggling. I rushed into Daniel's room, heart pounding, only to find him lying still, eyes closed, the covers tucked neatly around him. But something was wrong. His lips were curved upward in a faint smile, even as he slept. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to talk to someone else who knew. Emma had warned me, but she wasn't the only parent. If there were other families going through this, surely one of them would talk. Surely one of them would help me. So I began watching. At the park, at the grocery store, on the sidewalks after school. I studied the children and their reflections in car windows and shop glass. And the more I looked, the more I realized Emma had been right. It wasn't just Daniel. It wasn't just Lily. It was everywhere. Dozens of children, maybe more, moving just slightly out of sync with their reflections. Their parents' forced smiles, brittle and strained, as if pretending made it better. Some mothers looked hollow, like they'd been crying for weeks. Others avoided my gaze entirely, as though acknowledging the truth would make it worse. One afternoon, I spotted a boy on the swings. His legs pumped forward, back in perfect rhythm. But when I glanced at the metal slide beside him, his reflection lagged behind, swinging a beat too late. And when his mother noticed me staring, her face drained of color. She shook her head frantically, mouthing a single word, "Stop." That was when I understood. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't random. Something had been happening to this town for generations, and everyone knew it. Everyone except me. And now, whatever had taken their children had come for mine. By the following week, I was unraveling. Every conversation with Daniel left me hollow, every glance into his eyes made my chest tighten with dread. It wasn't that he acted badly, if anything, he acted too perfectly. He didn't throw tantrums anymore, didn't leave toys scattered across the floor, didn't even raise his voice. He had become a model child, one that other parents might envy. But it wasn't him. It was like someone had studied Daniel, memorized him, and then ironed out all the wrinkles that made him real. His laughter, his clumsy joy, his stubborn streak, all gone. What remained was an imitation so polished that the lack of flaws felt monstrous. I couldn't pretend anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know if there was still a way to get my Daniel back. Emma's warning echoed in my mind, but warnings didn't matter now, I was already in too deep. That night, I drove across town under the cover of darkness. The roads were empty, the streetlights buzzing like dying insects. I headed toward the old community center, the one that had been shut down years ago after the roof collapsed. I had overheard whispers, fragments of hushed conversations, about parents meeting there, away from watchful eyes. If there was any truth to this nightmare, they would know. The building loomed like a corpse at the edge of the neighborhood, its windows boarded and its walls draped in vines. My headlights swept across the crumbling steps, catching a flash of movement. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the doorway, watching me. But when I blinked, it was gone. I parked and killed the engine, my pulse hammering. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But then I thought of Daniel, of his too perfect smile, of his reflection that blinked half a second too late, and I forced myself out of the car. The air smelled of damp wood and rot as I pushed the heavy door open. Inside, the darkness was suffocating, broken only by faint candlelight flickering down the hall. I followed it, each step groaning against the warped floorboards. And then I heard them, voices. Low, urgent whispers spilling out of a room at the end of the corridor. My heart leapt as I pressed myself against the wall and peeked inside. There were at least a dozen people gathered around a cluster of candles. Mothers, fathers, faces pale and drawn, eyes sunken with sleeplessness. They looked like survivors of some unseen war. One man clutched a photograph so tightly his knuckles had gone white. A woman beside him held a child's shoe, rocking it in her lap like a relic. I stepped forward, my voice trembling. Please, tell me you know what's happening. The room went silent. Every head turned. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Emma emerged from the circle, her face shadowed in the candlelight. I told you not to come, she said softly. But there was no anger in her voice, only sorrow. I had to, I whispered. It's Daniel. He's not Daniel anymore. And I know you've all seen it too. A murmur rippled through the group. One of the fathers stood up, his hands shaking. They took my daughter, he rasped. 3 months ago. She looks like her, talks like her, but she's not. She's not. His voice cracked, and he sank back down, burying his face in his hands. Emma's eyes glistened with tears as she guided me to sit. "You're not alone," she said. "None of us are." "But the truth," she hesitated, her voice trembling. "The truth is worse than you think." The others leaned closer, their eyes darting toward the shadows as if afraid to be overheard. And then Emma told me the story. It started decades ago, long before any of us were born. Strange disappearances, strange children. Families would whisper, but no one ever spoke openly. The replacements weren't violent, at least not at first. They didn't need to be. They only needed to blend. A town full of parents pretending not to notice was far easier to manage than a town that fought back. And those who did fight back, who tried to expose the truth, were erased. Not killed, not missing, but erased, their names and faces scrubbed from memory as though they had never existed at all. As Emma spoke, my skin prickled with cold dread. I wanted to deny it, to cling to the possibility of some rational explanation. But deep down, I already knew she was right. I had seen the proof with my own eyes, in Daniel's glassy stare, in the perfect precision of his every movement. "There's a name for them," one of the fathers whispered hoarsely. His eyes flicked toward the window, where the dark glass reflected the candlelight. "We call them echoes. Because that's all they are, hollow imitations of what was once real." My breath caught in my throat. Echoes. The word fit too well. "What do they want?" I asked, my voice breaking. For a long time, no one answered. The silence grew heavy, unbearable. Then Emma finally spoke. "They want us to stop asking questions. And if we don't," she looked down, her voice no louder than a breath, "they'll replace us too." The candles flickered violently as if stirred by an unseen wind, and in the wavering shadows, I thought I saw something, faces in the dark glass of the windows. Faces that weren't ours. The room was heavy with silence after Emma's words, as if the truth itself had weight. My skin prickled, my breath shallow, as though even acknowledging what we were discussing might draw their attention. The candles sputtered and hissed, shadows twisting unnaturally across the cracked walls of the community center. Every parent in that circle looked like they were waiting for something, something inevitable, something they couldn't stop. Finally, one of the mothers spoke, her voice hoarse from crying. "There's a way," she said, gripping the photograph of her missing daughter so tightly it trembled in her hands. "Not to bring them back, but to prove it. To make the echoes show themselves." The others shifted uncomfortably, and I felt a nervous ripple move through the group. Emma's jaw tightened. "Stop," she warned, her voice sharp. "You know what happens when anyone tries." The woman's eyes, wide and bloodshot, locked onto mine. "You deserve to know," she insisted. "You need to know. Or you'll go crazy pretending this is normal, pretending your child is still your child." Her lips quivered, and she lowered her voice to a whisper. "There's a ritual. Old. Older than this town. It forces the reflection to betray itself." My heart hammered in my chest. A ritual? I wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, but hadn't I already seen the impossible? Hadn't I already watched my son's reflection delay a blink, his smile stretch just a fraction too wide, his voice fall into patterns that weren't his? "What ritual?" I asked, leaning forward despite Emma's glare. The mother hesitated, scanning the room as if expecting something to reach out of the shadows. "It has to be done at night. A mirror, salt, and the child's name written in your own blood. You call them 3 times. If they're real, nothing happens. But if they're an echo," her voice faltered, "the reflection won't obey. It will show itself." Goosebumps raced up my arms. My throat felt like it had closed, but I forced the words out. "And if it's not really them, then what?" The woman's face crumpled, tears spilling over. "Then you'll wish you'd never asked." Emma shot her a look of pure anger, but beneath it was fear, raw and desperate. She turned to me, clutching my hand. "Don't do it," she said fiercely. "That ritual, it doesn't give you answers. It gives you consequences." The last parent who tried, their house was found empty. Not just them, but their whole family. Gone. As if they never lived there. Her grip was ice cold, trembling. That's what the echoes do when you push too far. They don't just replace the children. They erase everything that stands in their way. The candle flames sputtered again, and my eyes flicked to the window. For a heartbeat, I swore I saw movement in the reflection, shapes pressed against the glass, watching. Too many shapes. Too many eyes. Fear roared through me like fire, but under it was something stronger. Rage. This was my son. My real son. And if there was even the faintest chance that ritual could prove the truth, I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't sit in that circle of broken parents and accept helplessness as my future. I left the meeting that night with my head spinning, Emma's warning echoing in my ears. The drive home felt unreal, the streets too quiet, the houses looming like hollow shells. Every window I passed reflected faint glimmers of candlelight that shouldn't have been there. I couldn't shake the feeling that the reflections were watching me, following me, waiting. When I pulled into my driveway, Daniel was standing in the upstairs window, perfectly still. Too still. His face was lit by the pale glow of his nightlight, but his expression was blank. Empty. He didn't wave, didn't blink. Just stared. I stumbled inside, my body numb with dread. Daniel was already in bed, tucked neatly under the covers, breathing evenly like any ordinary child. For a long moment, I stood in the doorway, staring at him, trying to convince myself he was real. But then his eyes opened. Slowly. Too slowly. He blinked once. Then again, delayed, like a puppet that had forgotten its cue. And then, without a word, he smiled. I retreated, my breath caught in my throat, and fled to the kitchen. My hands shook as I rummaged through the drawers until I found what I needed, salt. I fetched a small mirror from the hallway closet, and then I stood there with a knife poised over my fingertip, my mind screaming against itself. Emma's warning thundered in my skull, if you do this, you'll bring consequences. But my son's smile, my son's not son, was waiting upstairs. I pressed the blade against my skin and dragged it just enough to draw blood. Red beaded instantly, dripping onto the counter. With a trembling finger, I scrawled Daniel's name across the back of the mirror. The house hummed. Low. Deep. Like it had been holding its breath, waiting for me to begin. I set the mirror on the floor, circled it with salt, and whispered his name 3 times. Daniel. 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 At first, nothing. Only silence. Then the air grew colder, and the hum deepened, vibrating through the floorboards, rattling the dishes in the cupboards. The mirror's surface shimmered, and my heart leapt into my throat as Daniel's face appeared. But it wasn't the reflection from upstairs. This Daniel was smiling too wide, his eyes bulging, glassy, unblinking. His lips parted, and though the real Daniel slept soundly above, the reflection whispered in a voice not his own. You shouldn't have called me. The mirror shook violently, the salt scattering as if pushed by unseen hands. The reflection's grin stretched impossibly, splitting its cheeks, and a second voice, deeper and layered, joined the first. We are awake now. And then every mirror in the house shattered at once. The sound of shattering glass reverberated through the house like a gunshot, each mirror breaking in unison, echoing through the halls until the silence that followed felt unbearable. I stood frozen, surrounded by jagged shards glinting like wet teeth in the dim light. My blood still smeared across the broken mirror at my feet, Daniel's name scrawled in crimson across its fractured surface. My ears rang, my heart thudded violently, and for a single, fragile second, I wondered if I had gone mad. Then the hum returned. Deeper now. Hungrier. The walls seemed to inhale and exhale with it, the sound vibrating through the beams and floorboards. The air itself felt thick, charged, as though I were standing in the belly of some enormous, living thing. My skin prickled as shadows bent in unnatural ways, stretching too far, clinging to corners like oil. I staggered back into the living room, glass crunching beneath my bare feet. My breath caught when I saw Daniel, my son, standing at the bottom of the staircase, though I knew I had left him sleeping upstairs. His eyes were wide, his expression blank. For a fleeting heartbeat, hope pierced through the dread. Maybe it really was him. Maybe the ritual had pulled the real Daniel back. But then he blinked. Too late, too slow. His head tilted at an angle no child should ever make, and his lips curved into that same perfect, lifeless smile. "You woke us," he whispered, though his lips barely moved. His voice was layered now, two tones speaking at once, the familiar softness of Daniel's voice, and beneath it, something cavernous and cold. My blood turned to ice. "Where's my son?" I demanded, my voice cracking, rising into a shout I could barely recognize as my own. "What did you do with him?" The not Daniel tilted his head further, the tendons in his neck creaking like old rope. He took one step forward, then another, each movement jerky and stiff, like he was remembering how to control the body. The hum of the house deepened with every step, until it felt like my ribs were rattling against my lungs. "Your son is still here," the voices said in unison. "But you called us. And now you must choose." The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into moments of near-total darkness. And in each blink of shadow, I saw them, reflections of children standing in the walls, in the glass of picture frames, in the sheen of the hardwood floor. Dozens of them. Their eyes were glassy, their smiles too wide, their movements out of sync with the world around them. They were Daniel's echo, multiplied, an army of hollow shells staring at me with hunger. I backed away, fumbling for something, anything, to defend myself. My hands closed around a heavy brass lamp, and I raised it high, ready to swing. But the not Daniel only laughed, a sound that slithered under my skin like worms. "You can't break us," the voices taunted. "We are older than your house. Older than your town. We have always been here, waiting for the call." The lamp shook in my hands, but I forced myself to grip tighter, my pulse hammering in my ears. "I don't care what you are," I hissed, my voice trembling but fierce. "Give me back my son." For a moment, silence. The echo children in the glass froze, their heads tilting in perfect unison, their wide smiles vanishing. The not Daniel stepped closer, and his face shifted, just slightly, but enough. The glassy sheen in his eyes faltered, replaced with something human. Fear. Desperation. "Mom," the voice cracked, weak and trembling, the way Daniel used to sound when he had nightmares. His lips quivered, his hands reaching out as if to grab mine. "It's me. Please. Don't let them take me." The lamp nearly slipped from my fingers. My throat closed, tears burning behind my eyes. For one breathless second, I believed him. It was my Daniel. It had to be. But then the hum surged again, drowning out everything, and his expression shifted back, the smile sliding into place like a mask. "Choose," the voices commanded again, louder this time, shaking the walls. "Keep the echo, or follow the real one into the dark." The room convulsed. The floorboards rippled beneath my feet like waves, and the photographs hanging on the walls shuddered violently. Faces in the pictures blurred, then vanished, replaced by the hollow-eyed grins of the echo children. The ceiling groaned as if the whole house were collapsing inward. I stumbled backward, pressing myself against the wall, choking on fear. "Keep the echo, or follow the real one into the dark." The words rang in my skull, a cruel ultimatum that I couldn't comprehend. Were they saying Daniel was still alive somewhere? Somewhere beyond this house? Or was this just another trick to lure me deeper into their nightmare? The Echo children pressed their faces closer to the glass, their eyes unblinking, their teeth bared in silent laughter. One of them pounded a small fist against the inside of a picture frame, the glass splintering with each strike. Another reached from the shimmer of the window pane, their fingers stretching impossibly far before snapping back. They were trying to break through. I clutched the lamp tighter, my hands slick with sweat and blood. My heart screamed at me to run, to get out of the house, to never look back. But my soul, the very core of me, whispered a single truth: if my Daniel is still out there, I can't leave him. Not to them. Not to the dark. I swallowed hard, lifted the lamp like a weapon, and whispered into the trembling air, "Then show me where he is." The hum stopped. Dead silence fell over the house, so sudden it felt like the world itself had inhaled and refused to exhale. The not Daniel smiled one last time, his glassy eyes gleaming. And then the floor beneath me cracked open, splitting down the center of the living room like a jagged mouth. A darkness deeper than night yawned wide, pulling at me with an impossible gravity. "Follow," the voices said in perfect unison, echoing from every broken shard of glass. "If you dare." The floor split wider with a sickening crack, the boards tearing apart like skin under a blade. I stumbled forward, barely catching myself against the wall as the living room yawned into a chasm of darkness. No ordinary basement lay beneath, it was a void, endless and consuming, a wound carved into the earth itself. The air that rose from it was not cold, nor warm, but wrong, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like rusted iron and old blood. My breath caught in my throat as the shadows writhed, shifting with a sick pulse that seemed alive. Daniel, or the thing wearing him, stood at the edge of the fissure. His glassy eyes reflected nothing, as though they were windows into the void itself. He reached out a small, pale hand toward me, his lips parting just slightly. "Come, Mom," he whispered, the words carried by voices that overlapped and collided like whispers in a crowded room. "He's waiting for you." Every instinct screamed at me to run, to climb the stairs, to fling open the front door and never return. But my body betrayed me. My legs trembled, rooted in place, my fingers clutching the brass lamp as if it were the only tether keeping me in the world of the living. My mind swirled with the ultimatum: keep the Echo, or follow the real one into the dark. If there was even the slightest chance my son was still alive, buried beneath this nightmare, how could I abandon him? The hum returned, low and rumbling, and with it came movement. From the jagged maw of the abyss, pale hands began to emerge, tiny, childlike fingers, curling over the edges of the floorboards. One by one, children hauled themselves upward, not from flesh and bone, but from reflection. Their bodies shimmered as if made of glass, fragments of broken mirrors piecing them together. Their faces were near perfect replicas of children I recognized from the town, neighbors' sons, schoolmates of Daniel, kids I had seen laughing in the park. But their eyes, God, their eyes, were smooth and glossy, like polished marbles that reflected nothing but emptiness. They crawled onto the floor, their limbs clicking like porcelain joints, their mouths twitching into smiles that were too large, too sharp. Dozens of them surrounded me, circling slowly, their glassy feet leaving streaks of condensation on the wood. They didn't speak, but their presence filled the silence with suffocating weight. Every breath I took felt stolen, borrowed. And then, above the abyss, I saw him. A figure shifted in the dark below, small but undeniable. A boy's outline, fragile and trembling, his face half hidden in shadow. My heart lurched painfully against my ribs. Daniel. The real Daniel. His wide, tear-streaked eyes stared up at me, his lips moving, forming words I couldn't hear. He looked weaker, thinner, his skin pale as candle wax. He raised a trembling hand toward me, desperate, begging. "Mom." His voice finally broke through the suffocating hum, thin and cracked, like it had traveled miles through the earth to reach me. "Help me." Please, don't leave me here. The glass-eyed children turned their heads in perfect unison, their wide smiles faltering. Their eyes darkened, as though a shadow passed across each marble surface. The knot Daniel at the chasm's edge stiffened, his grin twitching as though the mask of perfection could no longer hold. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, and in that silence, I realized the truth. This was not a choice between illusion and reality, it was a trap. The echoes were keepers, guardians, holding the real children below, feeding on their fear, their stolen lives. And every family that had ever stayed in this cursed town had made the same mistake. They either accepted the echo version of their child, smiling and hollow, or they stepped into the abyss and were lost forever, swallowed whole by the hum. I clutched the brass lamp tighter, my knuckles white, blood seeping from the shallow cuts across my palms. I see you, I whispered, my voice shaking but steady, my eyes locked on Daniel's trembling figure in the pit. I see you, baby. And I swear, I'm coming. The house reacted instantly. The hum deepened into a roar, the walls trembling, dust cascading from the ceiling as if the entire structure was collapsing inward. The echo children screamed, not with voices, but with the sound of shattering glass, high and sharp, piercing my skull until I thought it would split me apart. The knot Daniel lunged forward, his marble eyes blazing with fury. No, the overlapping voices shrieked. You cannot take him back. He belongs to us. I lifted the lamp high and swung with every ounce of strength left in me. The brass struck the side of his face with a sickening crunch, the illusion cracking like porcelain. His head snapped sideways, a jagged fracture splitting across his glassy cheek. No blood, no flesh, only shards that splintered and rained to the floor, tinkling like ice. He let out a scream that rattled my bones, his body convulsing violently. The other echo children shrieked in response, their smiles splitting unnaturally wide, their movements twitching and jerky as they rushed forward. I braced myself, back against the wall, clutching the broken lamp like a weapon as their hollow faces closed in, the abyss yawning wider at my feet. And from below, Daniel's real voice cut through the chaos once more, filled with desperation and pain. Mom! Hurry! They're pulling me down. My heart clenched so hard I could barely breathe. The world was collapsing, the house splitting apart, the echo children swarming closer. I had seconds, maybe less. And in that moment, I realized the only way to save him would be to step into the darkness myself. The floorboards gave way beneath me, collapsing into splinters as I leapt into the abyss. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, no air, no sound, only the crushing pressure of blackness swallowing me whole. My body seemed to fall forever, weightless yet heavy, my ears filled with the endless hum that had haunted me since the first night in the house. Then, suddenly, I landed on something solid. My knees buckled, pain shooting up my legs, but I was alive. The ground beneath me was not wood, nor stone, but a shifting surface like polished obsidian. It shimmered faintly, reflecting distorted images as if I were standing on the surface of a frozen lake. Except the reflections staring back weren't mine. Dozens of pale, glass-eyed children peered up at me from beneath the surface, their faces pressed against the barrier as though desperate to claw their way free. Their mouths moved soundlessly, their hands scraping in a slow rhythm that matched the pulsing hum. Mom! Daniel's voice cut through the void, raw and trembling. I spun around, and there he was. My real son, kneeling just a few feet away, his small frame shaking, his skin so pale it looked translucent. His wrists bore faint bruises, as though unseen hands had gripped him too tightly. His eyes, thank God, his eyes, were real. They blinked in sync, wide with terror, and when they met mine, I saw the same little boy who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms. I ran to him, dropping the broken lamp, scooping him into my arms. His body felt too light, fragile, but he was warm, alive. He clung to me, sobbing into my shoulder, his tiny fingers digging into my skin as though afraid I'd vanish. I knew you'd come, he whispered. I knew it. But the shadows didn't let us celebrate. The humming deepened, reverberating through the void until the ground itself cracked, splintering like shattered glass. From the fissures rose figures, taller, darker, grotesque. They were not children, not even echoes. These were the architects, the true forms behind the glassite illusions. Their bodies were elongated, spindly, their skin stretched taut over skeletal frames. Their faces bore no features except for hollow sockets where eyes should be, each socket glowing faintly as if lit from within. One stepped forward, its head cocking unnaturally, and when it spoke, dozens of voices layered over one another, old and young, male and female, all dripping with malice. You broke the covenant. My arms tightened protectively around Daniel. What covenant? I demanded, though my voice trembled. The creature extended a jagged hand toward us, its fingers impossibly long, sharp as glass shards. The covenant of exchange. You live in this town, you give us one. One child to join our reflection, to keep the cycle unbroken. In return, you keep your peace. Your houses. Your lives. Its empty sockets seemed to bore through me. You refused the gift. You rejected the echo. You chose the stolen one. My heart raced, my mind reeling. The town. The neighbors who never invited us in. The doors bricked from the inside. The silence in the streets. They had all accepted it. They had all chosen the hollow reflections rather than face this truth. I staggered back, clutching Daniel as the ground splintered further, glass-eyed children pressing harder against the surface beneath our feet. Their silent screams echoed in my skull. The towering figures advanced, slow and inevitable. No, I whispered, my throat raw. You can't have him. He's mine. The creature tilted its head, the hum rising like a swarm of bees. Then you will take his place. The glass beneath my feet shattered. I plummeted downward again, this time dragging Daniel against my chest, refusing to let go. The reflections burst apart into fragments of light, slicing across my skin, cutting me open. My scream mingled with Daniel's as the world fractured into blinding white. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in my kitchen. Morning light streamed through the curtains, soft and golden. For a dizzying moment, everything looked normal. The hum was gone. Daniel was sitting at the table, his small hands wrapped around a glass of orange juice, his hair messy, his smile sleepy. He looked up at me, blinking, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice gentle, ordinary. I staggered toward him, tears spilling down my cheeks. I touched his face, his hair, his arms, desperate to feel something real. He laughed softly. "What's wrong?" I almost let myself believe it. Almost. Until I noticed the glass of juice in his hands. His fingers didn't curl naturally around it, they hovered slightly, like porcelain props. And when he lifted it to his lips, the reflection in the juice didn't blink. I froze. My stomach turned to stone. Daniel smiled at me again, warm and perfect. "Aren't you glad it's over?" The hum returned, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. It pulsed from the walls, the floor, the air itself. The town had accepted the cycle, and I had been too late. I had stepped into the abyss, but I hadn't come back. Because the truth hit me like a knife. The real me never left the void. I had taken his place. And now, in the reflection of Daniel's glassy eyes, I saw myself staring back, not as a mother, not as a woman, but as something hollow, something trapped forever on the other side of the mirror.